computer. Right. Just give me a second here to get everything together. So like I said, we're not going to be chanting and dancing the runes. What I did instead was I came up with a new topic, did some rapid research, and came up with this. So welcome everybody to our fifth of the now 7-part series on advanced runology by Birch v. Baum. Tonight's class is going to be a trip. We're going to be learning about Runic Cosmology, taking an in-depth look at runes and the 9 worlds, as well as, of course, me being a tree. We're also going to mention Yggdrasil here and there, the Great World Tree. As I've discussed throughout this rune series, the runes are intricately linked to almost everything in heathen cosmology. And as we've talked about the runes, we've talked about divination, we've talked about magic, and I know for a fact that I've mentioned this fact from time to time. But since we cannot chant and dance the runes due to this week's deluge here in South Florida, I decided we can take a little bit of a deeper dive into runic cosmology. More specifically, let's talk about how you can use the 9 worlds and Yggdrasil, the world tree, to connect with the cosmological aspects of the runes and understand their implications. I just want to give one other quick disclaimer here before we begin. This is a more interpretive and subjective topic than what we've been covering in most of these lessons on advanced runology. As such, there is going to be more UPG than what I've been teaching in the first few classes. But as far as what's described of the rune magic and of the worlds themselves, I've stuck as close to the sources, both modern and ancient, as I could. The UPG is in which rune I placed where, and also in some of the interpretations of what that means. Also, it's because for the purposes of this class, I limited myself to 1 world per rune and 1 rune per world, which meant coming up with some creative choices in a few places, choices that others might make differently. I've researched these to the best of my ability, and for my part, I stand by the decisions that I've made. Could there be others? Of course, which is why I'm being upfront about this here, because you are all welcome, as you learn more and work more with the runes, to come up with your own theories based upon your interpretation of the lore of the runes and the 9 realms. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin back at the very beginning of everything. Show. Slide. Go. Once before time and the world as we know it existed, there was the great gap where the worlds would form. In this gap flowed 12 rivers from a single fountain, the Havelgamir, and those rivers froze in the deep cold. As the rivers froze, they formed a realm made of ice and fog called Niflheim. We think about the scientific theory of the Big Bang. You can imagine this point in time in Niflheim as the point before the Big Bang. There was no time, and thus there was only the eternal present. And as we discussed when we were talking about Isa, Isa is the rune of the present moment, the rune of what is happening right now. Isa, like Niflheim at this beginning point, is a rune devoid of motion, a rune of the deep cold, and represents the power of that present moment. And from this birthplace in ice came much of what we know today. The great dragon Nidhogg, pictured here on the left, lives in this realm, and it is here that he is eternally gnawing on the roots of Yggdrasil, which are located in Niflheim. and he will continue to chew on them until the world's end. Niflheim lies at what is thought to be the northern end of that gap, the Ginnunga Gap, which is a vast void stretching in the universe. But the world could not stay forever in ice, because there is also fire. When the heat of Muspelheim blazed from the south across the Ginnunga Gap, the frozen stillness of the world ceased before the active burning fire. What better rune, then, to call upon the magic of this space than, besides Sawilo, the rune of the active burning sun, the chaos and power of unquenchable fire, and the blaze of endless heat, which those of you who have lived in Florida are all too familiar with. The denizens of Muspelheim are no friendlier to humankind than the ice giants of Niflheim. They are called Thyrsis. They are fire demons, and their leader is Surt. As the forces of ice and fire met, rain fell, fog thickened, rime formed, and here the sacred cow Audhumbla and Ymir, the giant, came into existence. Audhumbla, by the way, is represented among the Runic Cosmology by the rune Urus, and she is one of the very first, possibly even the very first, living creature. There is no clear answer as to where she, or Ymir, came from. She was simply there. And like the rains of Urus, her presence brings life in its wake. As she licked at the ice, Bor and his wife appeared, and they were the parents of the first three Aesir gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve. And just as the two worlds, one of fire and one of ice, were the first to arrive, so they will be instrumental in bringing about the end of time at Ragnarok. Loki's ice giants will sail forth from Niflheim in their ship made out of the fingernails of the dead, and Surt will use his flaming sword to kill Freyr and set fire to all 9 worlds. Yggdrasil is the third primeval entity, alongside Aumbla and Ymir, which simply seems to exist at the very beginning of everything. It is the world tree, the axis mundi on which all 9 worlds rests. Its rune is Aiwaz, and Aiwaz's shape even mirrors the sacred tree which forms the backbone of the heathen universe. One root, in Asgard, is the home of the Norns and their well, from which Odin pulled up the runes. A second is in Jotunheim, where Mimir has his well, where Odin traded his eye for wisdom, and the third is in Niflheim, where the foggy, frozen power of Nidhogg is eternally devouring it, a reminder that nothing can last forever. Thus, when you work with Aiwaz, you are working with the power of a tree that is linked to the entire cosmology, that contains the seeds of life and death, and it predates even the known universe. All things, life, death, runes, fate, chaos, order, everything that is, that will be, that was, they're all there on Yggdrasil, the axis mundi, accessible through the power of the rune Aiwaz. Let's come a little closer to home now. Midgard, the middle ground, is the earth where we live. It was born in the Ginnunga Gap, where once Ymir and Aumbla lived. When Odin, Vili, and Ve, the sons of Bor, whom Aumbla licked out of the ice, when they slew Ymir, the giant picture there on the left, they built Midgard out of his body. So if you imagine Midgard then, our world is very much the product of sacrifice. At its very beginnings, it is the sacrifice of Ymir to make this world out of what was once the void of nothingness, the gap. There's no more powerful rune to imagine such a sacrifice than Jera. Jera is literally the rune of the earth, named for the earth. It's not just about her passing seasons, the years that form as she spins around the sun, but also the crops which we grow on her green skin, that we raise from seeds, that are watered by the rain, that are blessed by our hopes and our desires, and then cut down to bring life where otherwise there would be nothing. Because whether plant or animal, there can be no life without first a death. And this exchange, this concept of sacrifice, is at the very heart of Jera's power. That you cannot gain without losing, but sometimes you do gain more than what you have lost. How is that any different from what happened to Ymir, who was fed from the milk of his cow Ahumla, symbolic of the rains of Uruz? But then he was harvested by the gods to bring life into the void. Once again, we see the power of life, death, and life again, a great circle which is ever dancing and changing from one season to the next. This is one of the great mysteries of earth magic, and it is also the magic of Jera, her rune. Now comes Jotunheim, the other cold realm besides Niflheim. Jotunheim is the land of the frost giants, the scene of many adventures, particularly those of Thor. These foes of the gods were born from Ymir's blood, and quite understandably, the enmity between gods and giants stems from the fact that Odin, Vili, and Ve killed their father Ymir. Isa is often associated with Jotunheim because of the ice giants, and because of the unyielding cold of this realm. But since I've already assigned Isa to Niflheim, under my rules I had to come up with another rune. And there's none that seemed to fit better than Nauthiz. Because when you consider the dynamic between the gods and the giants, and its results, and everything that came of it, Nauthiz is a prime example of what we can learn from these stories. Even though, yes, I know, it is a rune of fire. Why would I place a rune of fire in a realm of ice? Because the type of fire that Nauthiz represents is a need fire. It is a rune of necessity, of invention, of desperation that produces miracles. Throughout the stories, the interactions that the gods have with the giants, their fears of what they represent, the dangers that they pose, lead to some of the greatest successes that the gods enjoy within these stories. Think about, for example, when the massive wall was built around Asgard to keep it safe from incursions by the frost giants, even though, yes, it was built by a giant. But it was done, and it was successful for the most part. Also, think about how we have Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and how that is one of the, to this day, one of the most powerful and precious symbols of our heathen faith. And when you think about the runes that we've been learning about, Odin discovered them on a quest to gain more knowledge. And why did he want to gain all this knowledge? Because he knew that Ragnarok was coming. And he knew that every scrap of knowledge, every warrior he gathered to Valhalla, everything was going to be needed at the end of times. So considered in that light, what better symbol could there be than the need fire of Nauthiz? It is a representation of what it takes to deal with danger and chaos in our daily lives. Chaos is the opponent of order within heathen cosmology. Order is the gods, chaos is the Jotuns. And when chaos threatens order, gnawing away at it, it is necessary for order to find its place as well. And speaking of taking measures to deal with Jotuns and the danger that they pose, one cannot ignore the valuable contributions of the Svartels of Svartalfheim, who are also known as the dwarfs or the dark elves of Norse mythology. Now, dark here does not necessarily refer to a skin color, but rather from a combination of two possible sources. One is the fact that the dwarves or the dark elves are associated with the deep places below ground, the literal darkness of mines, caves, caverns, and the like, where they delve for precious materials. It's also referring to the inevitable soot and ash which falls on the blacksmiths of Svartalfheim as they work in the forges to build their marvelous creations. And after they delve into the hidden places of Svartalfheim, seeking hidden gems and materials, they then forge these materials into such marvels within their forges. So, since you cannot hardly talk about Svartalfheim without thinking about the forge and the fire and that sort of invention, Kenas is the inevitable rune of Svartalfheim. The legendary items that the two sets of dwarf brothers made, for example, when Loki tricked them into replacing Sif's hair, became some of the most valued treasures of Asgard. Fire, its potency, and more importantly, its application, building things like Mjolnir, Sif's hair, Freyr's boat, Odin's rings, all these things, and how to build them came from their knowledge and their understanding of how to be masters of their crafts. And that sort of knowledge is the cornerstone of Kenaz's fire, the fire of the intellect, the fire of inspiration, and more literally, the fire of the forge. So whether you are making a sacred oath ring or working on your new project at the office, Kenaz is your go-to source for honing your craft. Traditionally set against Svartalfheim is Lightelfheim, the realm of the Light Elves. Lightelfheim was given to Freyr as a tooth gift, because he was a prince. Generally, this realm is assumed to exist in the east and corresponds with the dawn. Details are a little vague as to what a light elf actually is. Some say that they are like the Landvatir or the land spirits of Midgard. Others that they are Tolkien-style elves, from which he drew his inspiration. Or maybe they are an ancestral spirit. Despite the less ominous name compared to dark elves, one should not assume these beings are all sunshine and rainbows. They are powerful, magical, and mysterious. One thing pretty much all sources about them agree on is that they are bright, as a reference to the shininess about their bodies, as well as the overall brightness of the sky in their realm, which is where we get the name Light Elf or Light Elf in English. I won't try and say it in Norse. Old Norse. So what else could we possibly place here besides Dagas? Dagas is the rune of the day. As a rune of the day, it represents not only the light of day, the light of in the sky. I have here a picture of the Northern Lights. It's the air itself. It is the interplay of light and air and color within the sky. It is dawn, it is dusk. It is all the times when the light dances and changes. And it is the brightness of that day. It is the hope of every new dawn and the quiet peace of every sunset. Okay, and next up, we have Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir gods. Now, one big question that a lot of people ask is, why are some gods called Vanir and some gods called Aesir? Well, thing is, most of the explanations have been lost to time. The main reason that survives is that it's because some gods come from Vanaheim and others come from Asgard. And as such, there are two tribes of gods. And as for what that would have meant on a practical level for your average Northman 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, that's never really been written down. But it appears, from what we do know, that the gods of the Vanir tribe were more centered around agriculture and the land. But unfortunately, we only have names and descriptions and details about a few of them that survive. Most of the rest of the Vanir pantheon is a matter of conjecture and uncertainty at this point. The ones we know the most about were the ones taken as hostages in Asgard after their war with the Aesir, and thus they come from the Eddas. Specifically, of course, we'd be talking about Freyr, the male god of the earth, of agriculture and green and growing things. His father Njord, who is a sea god. So again, you have, and then his sister Freya, who is the goddess of Scyther, witchcraft, magic, but also love and sexual potency, and very much an Aphrodite type figure at times. That she definitely knows she's beautiful and she's not afraid to act upon that beauty. So, since it's likely that the Vanir were, to some extent, an agricultural set of gods, or at least earth or fertility-based deities with power over nature, the seasons, and local hotspots of power, the rune we'll examine here is Ingus. Ingus is Freyr's rune. One of Freyr's other names is Ing, from which we take the Ingus, and sometimes you'll also hear Ingus referred to directly as Ing. It's because, again, it's Freyr, so it's taken from his name. Ingus is a rune of fertility. It is the seed, and within it is the life-giving power of the male earth deity. Like the mystery of what the Vanir gods were all about, it is a rune with hidden depths that only the most esoteric seekers can uncover. It lingers deep in the subconscious of the universe and the earth, waiting for the rain to fall and the sun to shine, and for the day when it can sprout and give life. So where we think of Jera as the rune of the sacrifice of the harvest, this is the rune of the potential of the harvest, of that potent fertility contained within the power of a god such as Freyr, who by his very essence is able to call life out of the death of winter. All right, now let's go to Asgard. Asgard is probably the most well-known and familiar of the realms because it is the realm of the gods of the Aesir, including Odin, Frigg, Thor, Tyr, Heimdall, and all the others. Midgard is usually described as being somewhere below Asgard on the world tree, and Asgard is considered to be somewhere above Midgard. So it doesn't really have a north, south, east, west orientation, even vaguely implied. It's somewhere above us, like beyond the sky, or as Marvel would have it, a different solar system. Asgard can be reached from the other worlds via the Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, which is guarded by Heimdall, the Shining One. There's no getting past Heimdall because his eyes are keen enough to see even the wool growing on a sheep or watch the grass growing. So he is the guardian of the Bifrost Bridge. Several runes could be applied here, including those that are, directly associated with some of the deities of Asgard. For instance, the way that you often would say Wunjo and Ansu's are runes of Odin, or Manaz is a rune of Heimdall. But if we're thinking about Asgard itself, Asgard as the realm associated with the Aesir gods, all right, you don't want to think about the gods as individuals here, but you want to think about the relationship between Midgard and Asgard, between what is below and between what is above. And in that light, I think Gabo is the best choice to place here. Gabo is the rune of exchange. And when you look at pretty much all the lore and all the sources and how it says to interact and relate with the gods, the concept of exchange, of bargaining, of offering sacrifice and praise in exchange for help and aid is at the very core of the relationship between the human and the divine in heathenry, Asatru, and other Norse religions of the modern and the ancient day. And of course, when we talk about things like the bloats that happen, the bloat is where the human offers a sacrifice. Back in the day, it was usually a blood sacrifice. In the modern context, you're more likely to maybe burn something in the fire or offer up energy and magic and intention in sacrifice. And in return for this, the gods offer their favor and protection. And this give and take is an essential part of the cosmic order, which the gods maintain and uphold across the entire cosmos. With the magic of Gabo, it becomes an even exchange. Gabo is all about that, every bargain you make, every offering you make, you should give as much as you are willing to take. That if your bargain is imbalanced, it's going to create problems down the line. So with Gabo and Gabo's magic, you're ensuring that there's an equality, at least within the exchange, if not in the power dynamic of those who are participating. Because whether, you're negotiating with your boss or negotiating with the gods, the power dynamic might be different. But ideally, the exchange itself will be beneficial and agreeable to both sides as a compromise. So that is Asgard and Gabo. And now we're almost done here. So we have here Hagalaz, the rune of Helheim. Last but not least, merely the end of the road for the majority of mortals, let's consider Hel, or Helheim, depending on your preference. The goddess Hel, the daughter of Loki and Angerboda, the queen of the dead, the half-beautiful maiden, half-horrifying corpse, rules here over the dead, whom she values and treasures more than the living who fear her and what she represents. And while in some there is a matter of interpretation and guesswork here, Hagalaz is her rune. So of course, there is nowhere else you can put Hagalaz except here in her realm of Helheim, her hall. Hagalaz is the 9th rune. It is, by that positioning, a rune of incredible power. It contains the ultimate potential, and by containing that ultimate potential, it also carries within it potential of our death and the memories of those who have passed on before within its energy. Hagalaz, Hel, and Niflheim are all closely linked together, both magically and otherwise. Some say that Helheim is a part of Niflheim, others as a separate space. And you can probably make a strong argument either way for whether when Odin gave Helheim to Hel to be the realm of the dead, whether it was a full split to almost another world, or if it's simply like a territory carved out of it, but otherwise occupying the same space on the tree. For the purposes of understanding their mythic cosmology, those distinctions are largely unnecessary. Hagalaz, one of its primary meanings is hailstone. Hail is ice combined with air, frozen and driving down on your head or your roof and making a horrible thunking sound. Niflheim, if you recall, is also represented by ice, and its rune is Isa. Both Helheim and Niflheim are well known for being cold, misty, and foggy. Whatever else we may think about the past, you have to admit that oftentimes the past is foggy. You know, human memory is not nearly as sharp and attuned as we want to think it is. There's always a little bit of mistiness around the edges. And the further back the thing is that we're trying to remember, the more mistier and uncertain those memories become. That's why you can have 10 people sitting in a room together, and the next day you ask them what happened, and you're going to get 10 different descriptions of what was going on, even if you had 10 witnesses to the same event. So that fogginess and memory is very much an aspect of Helheim and Hagalaz, because think about it. There's the line in the Havamal that is very famous, and I wrote it down, but I'm not actually going to try to read it in the Old Norse. What it means roughly is, cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself will die, yet the famed one never dies. What we remember of a person is what lives on in our memories long after they depart the mortal world. In other words, when a person dies, their memories are committed in our heads to a realm of fog and mistiness that gets blurrier with the passage of time. And thus, on a metaphysical level, when the dead are in Helheim, they are likewise growing mistier and foggier. And yet there, at least, they live on forever in her realm as her dead, even after they may be long forgotten by anyone who is still living on the earth. But it's just as time goes by, it gets foggier and foggier and more misty. And so in this way, both Helheim and Hagalaz, by containing memory, our subconscious, they are able to hold that power and protection for our beloved dead. And so that takes us through the 9 realms, the great world tree Yggdrasil, and the runes which we can use to represent them and gain a deeper understanding of both the realm and the rune. As I said at the beginning, this is an area of rune lore which is subject to a lot of interpretation. So if you disagree, please let me know what you choose, either in our closing conversation, or if you're watching this on the Abilina's Grove YouTube channel, in the comments section. Thank you everyone for coming to this quick little talk on Runic Cosmology. I hope you've learned something interesting about the 9 realms and the runes. And I'm going to stop the screen share and the recording now. Thank you.
Very good. Very